Chief Justice Olivia Clark of the United States Supreme Court always traveled incognito when she flew on personal time, no robes, no clerical collar, just a tailored navy blazer and simple black trousers. Yet on a busy spring morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport's Concourse E, her identity meant nothing to two airport police officers about to make the gravest mistake of their careers. Olivia stood in the first-class line at Gate E12, quietly reviewing notes on her tablet for an upcoming symposium on judicial ethics. Around her, business travelers tapped impatiently at their watches, families herded children toward departures for Orlando, flight crew called for final boarding. Olivia clutched her boarding pass and passport in one hand and sipped a bottled water with the other. The terminal's fluorescent lights hummed under the steel-gray ceiling. A few feet away, Elaine Montgomery, a well-to-do retiree in high heels and an emerald silk suit, glanced at Olivia with thinly veiled disdain. Elaine, accustomed to first-class perks and private lounges, spotted Olivia's calm demeanor and took it as a provocation. She murmured under her breath, "There's something about her. I don't trust it," then leaned toward the gate agent. "That woman's been eyeing my luggage," Elaine said loudly, tapping the counter. "I don't feel safe sharing this flight. You need to verify her credentials." The gate agent's polite smile faltered. "Ma'am, everyone here went through TSA screening. If there's a problem with her documents, we'll handle it." But Elaine was already dialing for security. Within moments, two uniformed officers, Damon Jackson and Ryan Fitzgerald, strode up, badges clipped to their belts, eyes fixed on Olivia. Both men had endured a morning of late flights and cranky passengers. They were eager for a routine call to break up the monotony. Officer Jackson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, step aside. We need to ask you some questions." Olivia looked up from her tablet with the same composure she brought to the bench. "Certainly," she replied, slipping the device into her leather tote. She followed Jackson and Fitzgerald to a spot just beyond the boarding line. Jackson's tone was brusque. "Name and identification, please." Without hesitation, Olivia produced her driver's license and boarding pass. Fitzgerald glanced at them and frowned. "Business class, huh? What do you do for a living?" Olivia paused. This was unusual, but her voice remained steady. "I serve as the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court." Both officers blinked. Jackson's jaw tightened, Fitzgerald's eyes narrowed. Elaine watched with a self-satisfied smirk, convinced she had uncovered some hidden threat. Jackson cleared his throat. "We received a complaint that you made another passenger uncomfortable. That's all we're doing, just verifying." "On someone's vague discomfort?" Olivia asked. "Is that sufficient cause to detain a federal judge?" Fitzgerald cracked his knuckles. "We're not detaining you, yet. Just answer the questions." By then, a few nearby passengers had sensed the tension. Phones appeared in reluctant hands, a couple of travelers exchanged puzzled glances. Elaine took a step closer, whispering to the cabin supervisor, "See? I told you something was off." Olivia folded her arms. "I have shown you every valid document. I have done nothing illegal. What more do you require?" Fitzgerald's smirk turned into a scowl. "You're being difficult. Step aside or we'll have to take further action." That was the moment Jackson showed his badge number, Jackson 2931, and Fitzgerald reluctantly followed with Fitzgerald 1874. Olivia noted both silently, aware that every second of this humiliating encounter was being captured on nearly a dozen cell phone cameras now trained on them. "Thank you," she said coolly. "For my records, I'll need your names and badge numbers, and I insist on speaking with your supervisor before any further questioning." Fitzgerald's face darkened. Jackson exchanged a look with his partner, uneasy for the first time. They had no real justification, only Elaine's racially tinged suspicion. Suddenly, Jackson reached out and grabbed Olivia's arm. "You're under investigation for interfering with a security check," he barked. Before she could react, sparkling steel cuffs snapped around her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin, and a collective gasp rose from the gathered crowd. Olivia Clark, Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, was handcuffed in broad daylight at Concourse E12, her wrists marked red where the cuffs had been tightened too far. Elaine's satisfied smile vanished as the reality of what had happened crashed over her. Around them, passengers whispered, filmed, and began to mobilize their own smartphones toward social media. And in that electric moment, the world paused, because no one expected the most powerful jurist in the nation to be treated like a common suspect. What happened next would send shockwaves through every level of American justice. The clang of metal cuffs echoed like a gunshot through Concourse E12. Passengers froze mid-step, phones snapping to life. A cluster of onlookers formed, whispering and pointing. A young man with dreadlocks raised his camera phone. "Yo, you good?" he asked, voice low but urgent. Olivia Clark remained composed, though the cold steel bit into her wrists. She met his gaze and nodded once. "Thank you," she said softly. Then she turned to Officers Jackson and Fitzgerald. "Will you please remove these restraints?" Jackson cleared his throat, eyes flicking to the gathering crowd. "You're under temporary detainment for security interference," he announced. "Wait here while we verify." Olivia cut him off. "You've verified nothing. You followed one civilian's prejudice instead of procedure. These cuffs are unlawful." At that moment, the gate agent, Ms. Teresa Nguyen, stepped forward. "Officers, I'm the supervisor on duty," she said, voice firm. "Please release Chief Justice Clark immediately and step aside." She raised her own badge. Jackson and Fitzgerald exchanged uneasy glances. Fitzgerald's lip curled. "Supervisor, we've received a complaint." Teresa held up a hand. "Then file it properly in the office. But you will not detain her here without probable cause." She nodded at two nearby airport police officers who had been drawn over by the commotion. Reluctantly, Jackson unclicked the cuffs. Olivia flexed her wrists, the red marks blooming bright. Teresa ushered the two uniformed helpers between Olivia and the original officers. "Ma'am, can I get you water? An escort out of the public area?" Olivia shook her head. "I'm not leaving until I've spoken to someone in charge. I insist on contacting the Federal Protective Service and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division." Teresa's eyes widened. "Yes, of course." She stepped aside, fished her radio out of her vest, and spoke quickly. Within minutes, she guided Olivia into a small, quiet office tucked behind the gate lounge. Two chairs faced a desk, the walls were bare. Jackson and Fitzgerald trailed behind, their faces flushed. Teresa closed the door. "Chief Justice Clark, you have every right to be here," she said in a lowered voice. "I'm very sorry for what happened." Olivia offered a curt nod. "Apology noted. Now, please place in writing the names, badge numbers, and shift logs of every officer involved, and provide any body cam or CCTV footage of the incident." Fitzgerald shifted uncomfortably. Jackson swallowed. Neither responded. Instead, Jackson snapped, "We'll write it up." Olivia unfolded her tablet, opened the Secure Notes app, and tapped rapidly. "I'm recording this conversation for accuracy," she said. "Please hand me a pen if you won't comply otherwise." Teresa produced pen and legal-size pad from her desk drawer. Olivia jotted down the date, time, location, and the names of Elaine Montgomery, Jackson 2931, Fitzgerald 1874, and Supervisor Nguyen. A brisk knock sounded. Two men in dark suits, badges glinting, stepped in, Special Agent Marcus Reed of the Federal Protective Service and Assistant U.S. Attorney Elena Ruiz. "Chief Justice Clark?" Reed said, voice respectful. He flashed credentials. "We received your request. We're here to take control of the investigation. Olivia stood and extended a hand. Thank you. Please secure all evidence, cuffs, footage, logs, and remove any barriers to a full inquiry under color of law statutes. Reed nodded, already issuing commands into his phone. Outside, staff scrambled to isolate recordings. Airline personnel and bystanders provided sworn statements. News spread instantly, #JusticeUnderArrest trended across social platforms. Clips of Olivia's calm dignity went viral, racking up millions of views in hours. Meanwhile, Elaine Montgomery was pulled aside by 2 federal agents at a nearby gate. Shock registered on her face as they asked for her account of events. "You're under preliminary review," one agent informed her. Elaine's smug confidence drained away. Back in the office, Olivia sat at the desk while Reed and Ruiz coordinated next steps. "We'll forward the findings to the Department of Justice for charging recommendations," Ruiz said. "You're free to continue your travel as soon as you wish." Olivia closed her tablet. "I appreciate your professionalism. But let this serve as notice: no one, no matter their rank, may be handcuffed based on bias or flimsy suspicion." She stood, smoothing her blazer. Teresa opened the door. "I'll escort you back to your aircraft," she offered. As they walked through the terminal, passengers parted to let her pass, many applauding softly or raising their phones in salute. Olivia paused at the gate. She turned to Jackson and Fitzgerald, still lingering against the wall. "I will be watching. And I will not forget." With that, she boarded her flight, head held high, leaving behind a stunned airport, a humbled security force, and the unmistakable promise that this was only the beginning. Within hours of her flight's departure from Atlanta, Chief Justice Olivia Clarke's handcuffing incident ignited a national firestorm. By late afternoon, major news networks ran live feeds of her exchange with officers Jackson and Fitzgerald. Social media feeds exploded with "Justice under arrest," "Free Clarke," and "Reform the Badge." Citizens across the country demanded answers. How could the nation's highest jurist be treated this way on U.S. soil? That evening, Clarke arrived at her Washington, D.C., chambers under tight security. As she stepped into the marble-floored rotunda, she was met by a cadre of reporters and a phalanx of protective agents. Clarke raised a hand for silence. "What happened today was not an isolated glitch in our system," she began, voice resonant in the echoing hall. "It was a symptom of deeply ingrained biases and procedural failures. I intend to use every tool at the judiciary's disposal to ensure it never happens again." Over the next 48 hours, Clarke worked with Special Agent Marcus Reed and Assistant U.S. Attorney Elena Ruiz to compile a formal complaint to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Their joint submission cataloged every procedural breach: failure to consult federal employee databases, refusal to verify her identity beyond face value, and use of force without probable cause. Simultaneously, Reed issued a federal protective order placing Jackson and Fitzgerald on administrative leave pending a criminal civil rights inquiry. On day 3, Clarke addressed Congress. Summoned before the Senate Judiciary Committee, she delivered a measured, impassioned testimony. "Esteemed members of Congress, I stand before you not as a grievance claimant, but as a guardian of the rule of law. If those sworn to uphold public safety can so easily abandon protocol and yield to prejudice, then no one is safe. Today, I ask you to enact standards that make transparent policing mandatory, require immediate badge number disclosure, and implement independent oversight for all law enforcement interactions with the public." Her words, carried live on CSPN, drew a standing ovation from representatives on both sides of the aisle. Senator Maria Lopez, DCA, and Senator Kenneth Grant, RTN, announced plans to co-sponsor the Equity and Accountability in Public Safety Act, which would codify many of Clarke's recommendations. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice released an interim policy memo echoing Clarke's demands. Mandatory body-worn cameras to be activated for all public-facing officers. Stop and verify protocol requiring rank review and supervisor notification before any detention. Civil rights certification for new recruits, including annual refresher courses on implicit bias and de-escalation. These directives went into effect immediately at federally funded agencies and served as a model for dozens of state and local departments. Back at the Supreme Court, Clark convened an emergency summit of judicial and law enforcement leaders. In the ornate conference room, she sat between Chief Judge Ramon Ortega of the Federal Appeals Court and Director Heather Sinclair of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Together, they launched Operation Justice Forward, a cross-agency initiative to revise training curricula, standardize incident reporting software, and create a publicly accessible database of police-citizen encounters. Clark also enlisted civil liberties organizations, ACLU, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, to partner on community outreach. Within a week, Know Your Rights workshops were scheduled in 150 cities, offering free legal clinics and distributing pocket-sized guides to police interaction laws. The ripple effect reached Hollywood. Documentary filmmakers from Sundance and HBO began chronicling Clark's ordeal and the resulting policy whirlwind. Within days, streaming platforms commissioned specials highlighting wrongful detention survivors, contextualizing Clark's experience alongside Sandra Bland, Kalief Browder, and other victims of overreach. Meanwhile, grassroots pressure mounted. A coalition of bar associations circulated a petition urging all 50 state Supreme Courts to adopt Clark's procedural reforms. Law school deans retooled curricula to include case studies on the Clark precedent, teaching future attorneys how to litigate against discriminatory policing tactics. On day 10, Clark returned to the Senate to testify on the final text of the Equity and Accountability Act. Her tone was firm but hopeful. With these measures, we can build bridges of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Procedural integrity is not a luxury, it is the linchpin of our constitutional democracy. The bill passed both chambers with bipartisan support and landed on the president's desk for signature. Within 72 hours, it became law. Across the nation, police departments scrambled to implement the new standards. Officer-in-charge recruitment ads featured slogans like, "Protect with honor," and "Accountability starts here." Civil rights auditors were embedded in busy precincts from New York City to rural Kansas. Departments reported that 87% of officers completed the new certification within the first month, and by the end of the quarter, civilian complaints of unjustified stops had dropped by 23%. Yet there was resistance. Police union representatives held press conferences decrying unnecessary red tape, and some mid-career officers sued to block the new training mandates, citing concerns over administrative overreach. Clark watched these developments closely. When a federal judge temporarily enjoined one stubborn department from enforcing body cam rules, she quietly sent a letter reminding that the law applied uniformly, and that judicial contempt for civil rights protections would be met with swift enforcement. In the months that followed, Clark traveled to major city halls and community centers, not as a distant jurist but as an advocate for systemic change. While her colleagues heard cases at the Supreme Court, she engaged directly with citizens in Justice Forward forums, listening to stories of everyday prejudice and ensuring they found both legal recourse and legislative remedies. By the one-year anniversary of her airport handcuffing, Operation Justice Forward had logged over 2,000 workshops, trained 150,000 officers nationwide, and established a real-time civilian reporting hotline. Several states passed mirror legislation, and even international law enforcement agencies, Canada's RCMP, Britain's Metropolitan Police, reached out for guidance on adopting the Clark framework. When asked how she kept up the relentless pace, Clark simply replied, "Justice cannot rest. Each new report reminds me why I began this work that day in Atlanta, because no one deserves to be powerless under the law." And so, what began as a moment of indignity became a catalyst for enduring reform, proving that when one person dares to demand fairness, the entire system can be transformed. Exactly 1 year after the Concourse E12 incident, Chief Justice Olivia Clark returned to Atlanta, this time by invitation, not under duress. She stepped onto the stage of the Georgia World Congress Center to address a packed auditorium of law enforcement trainers, community leaders, and survivors of wrongful stops. The banner behind her read, "Justice Forward, 1 year of change." Clark paused to let the applause subside. "When I was handcuffed here," she began, "it felt like the worst betrayal of my life. Today, I stand before you proud, because you answered the call." She pointed to a row of uniformed officers at the front. "Those body cams on your chests weren't just devices, they're a promise that no one will be silenced again." Among the officers was Sergeant Maya Thompson of the Atlanta PD, one of the first to complete the Justice Forward certification. Thompson recalled her own harrowing encounter. "I was called to detain a man for looking suspicious," she told the audience. "I stopped, asked for clarity, and de-escalated. He walked away free, and grateful. That never would have happened without these new protocols." As Thompson spoke, videos played on the screen, footage of her calmly talking down a distraught veteran, clips of new, stop and verify forms being filled digitally. The visuals demonstrated that procedural fairness no longer lived only on paper, it was saving lives. Later that afternoon, Clark convened a roundtable with 5 families whose loved ones had been wrongfully detained before the reforms passed. She listened as Patricia Ramirez described her son's arrest outside a grocery store. "They profiled him because of his hoodie," Ramirez said, tears in her eyes. "Now, Officer Nguyen apologized on the spot and walked him home." Clark reached across the table, squeezed Ramirez's hand, and promised continued support through the Justice Forward Legal Aid Network. Back in Washington, Clark's chambers had transformed. Her clerks weren't just researching Supreme Court opinions, many now staffed the new Civil Rights Rapid Response Unit, reviewing complaints overnight to flag any federal overreach. Clark watched as a clerk demoed the unit's smartphone app. Citizens could file an incident report in under 2 minutes, and see their submission routed immediately to the proper authority. Yet not all was smooth. At a state capital in the Midwest, a newly elected sheriff announced plans to roll back parts of the Equity and Accountability Act, arguing it hampered officers' discretion. News outlets splashed the quote across front pages, igniting fresh debate. Clark convened a secure conference call with White House counsel and DOJ leadership. "Discretion without accountability is a recipe for injustice," she said. They drafted a corrective memo reminding federal grantees that compliance was non-negotiable. Meanwhile, Jackson 2931 and Fitzgerald 1874, now defendants in a civil rights lawsuit, sat grimly in a courtroom in Birmingham, Alabama. Their attorneys argued good faith error, but multiple witness statements, including Elaine Montgomery's aggravated testimony, painted a stark picture of willful bias. The judge refused their motions to dismiss. A jury trial was set for later that year. On a spring morning in D.C., Clark walked the Supreme Court steps and paused at the spot where, months earlier, she had sworn in new justices. A young law student approached nervously. "Justice Clark, thank you for inspiring me to become a public defender." Clark smiled. "Remember," she replied, "the law is only as strong as the people who dare enforce it fairly." That evening, Clark attended a gala fundraiser not for herself, but for Justice Forward's scholarship fund. As an honoree read letters from minority law students, Clark reflected, the real victory wasn't in statutes or training manuals, it was in the renewed trust between citizen and state. Before leaving, she stepped onto a balcony overlooking the Washington Monument. The city lights shimmered below, and the map of Justice Forward workshops was projected onto the side of an office building, a moving mural showing every county that had adopted the reforms. Clark whispered to herself, "This is what one person can build." In the months ahead, Clark would face new challenges, judicial rulings interpreting the act, foreign delegations seeking guidance, and the ongoing work of embedding accountability into law enforcement's DNA. But on this night, as a gentle breeze stirred her documents, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. 1 year ago, she was powerless in a crowded terminal. Tonight, she had helped reshape the nation's promise of equal justice under law. In the weeks that followed, the Birmingham jury delivered its verdict. Officers Damon Jackson, badge 2931, and Ryan Fitzgerald, badge 1874, were found guilty of civil rights violations and unlawful detention. Each received 3 years in federal prison, loss of law enforcement certification, and a prohibition on ever serving in a public safety role again. As they were led away in handcuffs, ironically mirroring their actions against Chief Justice Clark, crowds of reporters and activists stood by the courthouse steps, cameras flashing like strobe lights, capturing every solemn moment. Meanwhile, Elaine Montgomery's civil trial reached a swift settlement. Facing mounting legal fees, public condemnation, and irrevocable damage to her reputation, she agreed to pay $500,000 in damages and issue a formal, court-approved apology to Chief Justice Clark. Her name was quietly removed from every charity board and social roster she once graced. Her mansion's gates bore no welcome signs, only the echo of her own misguided suspicion. Across the nation, the Equity and Accountability in Public Safety Act and Operation Justice Forward matured from new initiatives into entrenched protocols. Every federal transit officer now wore a body cam and carried an "Identify Before You Detain" card. Independent oversight boards convened publicly once a quarter, reviewing incident reports in real time. City councils and police chiefs reported transparency metrics at community town halls, celebrating a 35% drop in wrongful detention complaints and a 20% increase in de-escalation outcomes within the first year. But for Chief Justice Olivia Clark, the work never ended. She spent late evenings reviewing quarterly reform reports, personally signing off on grants for legal aid clinics in underserved neighborhoods. Letters poured into her chambers, stories of immigrants, students, veterans, and seniors who, emboldened by her stand, now knew they had rights to assert. She replied to each, offering referrals to pro bono attorneys and the encouragement she had longed for when she'd stood handcuffed in Concourse E12. Clark's personal toll was undeniable. She endured threat letters and harsh editorials accusing her of overreach. Sleepless nights stretched into dawn as she balanced Supreme Court duties with her reform crusade. Yet whenever doubt crept in, she recalled the moment she had asked for badge numbers, simple details that had unraveled a system's blind spots. That memory fueled her resolve. In an op-ed for the Washington Post, her first public article since the incident, Clark wrote, "Power without accountability is tyranny, no matter who wields it. When officers forgot to ask who I was, they forgot what I represented, the wall between individual liberty and unchecked force. Let my experience be a warning: every person, regardless of station, merits dignity under the law." Her words became a clarion call in law schools, editorial pages, and social justice classrooms. By the 2-year anniversary, Justice Forward had inspired international adoption. Canada's RCMP, the UK's Metropolitan Police, and Germany's Bundespolizei all consulted with Clark's team to pilot similar oversight measures. A symbolic plaque hung in the Supreme Court rotunda, listing the names of every citizen who had testified in public safety hearings since her call to action, an enduring reminder that democracy thrives when ordinary people speak up. On a crisp autumn morning, Clark returned to Concourse E12, this time to unveil a memorial plaque at the very spot she'd been detained. Engraved in polished stainless steel were the words, "Here, the rule of law prevailed. Let no one ever be silenced by fear or prejudice." Families of wrongfully detained individuals joined her, unveiling the plaque under a canopy of camera drones and fluttering civic flags. Applause rose like a crescendo. As the crowds dispersed, Clark stood quietly before the metal marker. The terminal buzzed with life, travelers ebbing through security checkpoints, unaware of the history beneath their feet. She placed a single white rose at the base of the plaque and whispered, "May this reminder never fade." Then, with the same composed grace she had shown in cuffs and courtroom alike, Chief Justice Olivia Clark walked away, her shoulders squared, her gaze forward, leaving behind a legacy that proved one person's courage can transform a system. Because sometimes, it takes the unjust handcuffing of the most powerful to remind us all, justice belongs to everyone. And that truth will leave you speechless.